Hello everyone, welcome back yet again, and this video is yet another variation on the twin engine throttle setup. This time it's a request from Rick in Texas, who is getting a model of the B25 with two Moki radial engines. Now, if you've ever heard a Moki radial engine at idle, oh, the sound is fantastic. So the thought of two of them burbling away at idle is just stunning. Rick, when you get it, we need video with sound. Anyway, what Rick has asked for is, the P4 stick operates both throttles when you're flying around. The sliders P5 and P6 have a bit of throttle control at the idle end of throttle, so you can do a bit of throttling up and down independently on the ground for, just starting the engines and taxiing. But he's also said for a little bit of engine sinking in the air. Well, those are two different requirements, but what the heck, I can give you both on the same thing. Also, he wants two 3-position switches, and I have a couple of them here. There's one, there's the other one. And in each switch deals with one engine, so we'll make this one here deal with the left engine, this one here deal with the right engine. And in position 1, it will be everything off. In middle position, the ignition will be on and the fuel pump will be running. And in the third position, it will be ignition on, fuel pump running, and the starter operating. Yes, because he hasn't got just two Mokis, he's got them with built-in starters. I hate you, Rick, I hate you. No, I don't really. I'm just very envious because I think they're fabulous engines. So let's have a look at how I would go about this. Now, there is always a problem in Jeti multi-engines with the trim and the trim buttons. I was experimenting with something 2-3 months ago, and the trim button just would not work when you went into digital trims and assigned it to yet another throttle. It just doesn't work properly, and I couldn't work this out. And I emailed Jeti, and they replied very promptly and said, yes, we know it's a bug. We're sorting it in the next software revision. We're in the moment, I think I'm on version 5.04 software, so you never know, they might solve it. However, we can get around this in this particular program very easily because Rick has said he wants 5 and 6 to allow him to have a bit of throttle, so we can use those as trimmers really as well. And let's take a look then at how I've got it set up. If we go into the basic properties, yes, I know it's a twin engine, but I've said one engine count only. And the reason for this is we want to create a separate function for the other throttle. That allows us to do all the nice mixing and things. If we'd selected 2 here, it just gives us the one function, but 2 servos allocated to it. But that doesn't help us because we can't mix to a servo. You can only mix to a function, which would mean any mixing we try and do of the P5 and P6, we couldn't separate it out between left and right engines. Okay, so that's why we stick with the engine count as 1. Let's go into functions assignment. So I've changed the name of the system created throttle from throttle to throttle left. It just helps later on when we're dealing with stuff. I've created a new function, throttle right, and I've assigned the control P4 to it. So we're not trying to mix the channel output from that in as the control in here, which I've done in the past. And the reason being, again, the trim buttons just don't work properly. If you do that and use the P4 trim buttons, yes, throttle left, the system created one, works fine. Throttle right trims up beautifully, but when you trim back from the neutral point, this one doesn't follow it for some reason. So we'll just stick with those and we'll ignore using the trim buttons. For completeness, you could go into digital trim and remove the trim button from the throttle altogether. And I'm not too worried about not having a single trim to try and say do engine kill, because you've got switches, switch you and switch off, you'll kill the engine straight away. So there's throttle right. And now we need quite a lot of new functions, because we need the ignition for the left engine, we need the pump for the left engine, and the starter for the left engine. So I'm presuming these are all onboard units. Obviously, yes, you've got your ignition unit, you can switch on and off by radio, the starter switches on and off by radio, and so I'm assuming because Rick asked for it, he's got the fuel pumps can be switched on and off by radio, rather than having a separate physical switch on the ground. Probably, I guess these are run by radio control switches. And then, of course, we replicate it, ignition right, pump right, starter right. And then I've created another two functions, trim for the left engine, trim for the right engine. It's not exactly trim, but it allows us to throttle up and down as well, but that'll do fine. So let's consider now what control we're going to assign for these items. So the left engine will run off this switch here, and ignition left. Okay, we want it to be off in that position, on and on in those two positions, which will be, so that's motor completely off. In that position, ignition and pump will be on, and in that position, ignition, pump and starter will be on. So ignition left, let's go in there and assign a control to it. Let's move the switch. This is not what we want, because that's going through three positions, and we don't want that. So we'll switch off proportional, and we've got this, which is not what we want either. So I'm going to put the switch to its mid position, press clear, and move it to the engine off position. Why I've done that will become clear as we roll through this. So the engine off position, the function is a tick. At the engine ignition on position, and the other ignition on position where the starter motor is engaged, we've got that. Okay. And what this will do basically is move the servo output from plus 100, minus 100, minus 100. So those two positions are the same output. That position's the opposite end of the output. Basically does the job. It might just need a servo reversing. Just for the sake of the demonstration, to make it easier to follow, I'm going to press rev so that you can see that with the switch in the up position it's off, and with the switch in the other two positions it's on. But actually, because it's just a servo output, it would have worked quite well there. You may have to, if you do that, you might have to actually reverse the servo output to get things to work properly. But just for the sake of neatness, in the demonstration, I'll do that. Okay. Now, the pump wants to be basically the same. It wants to be off in the up position and on in the mid and down position. So we'll go back in, same thing again, move it. We don't want it proportional. I'll put it in the mid position. The reason I'm going to put it in the mid position is that it's assigned it in the mid position and off in the two end positions. So if I put it in the mid position, clear it, raise it, it's going to put it on there. If I reverse it now, there we go. So now we can see with the switch in the off position, the ignition and the pump are off. Mid position, ignition and pump are on. Down position, ignition and pump are on, which just leads us to assign the starter. So we'll come down to that. Okay, move our switch. We don't want it proportional. Clear it out. Now we'll move it to the down position. There, tick there, off and off. Okay, so let's have a look through this. Switch is off. Ignition, pump and starter are off. Switch to middle, which is the engine run position. Ignition and pump are on. And when you want to start it, move the switch all the way down. Jump, jump, jump. Engine starts. Move it back to the mid position. There we are. Switch off. Engine stops. Okie doke. And all we have to do now is go through the same process for the right hand switch. So ignition right, in we go. Move the switch, don't want it proportional. Away from us will be everything running, so clear it out, move it towards me, reverse it. There we go. Come down, pump, go through the same process, don't want it proportional, clear that out, move it towards me, reverse it. Okay, so now we can see for the right hand engine, ignition pumper off, ignition pumper on, ignition pumper on. So I just need to come down now and set the starter for it. Okay, there we go. So now for the right hand engine, everything off, ignition and pumper running, motor run condition, starters running, bring the switch back to there, starter off. Let's have a look through all of them. So all switches for the engines off. So left engine, move to the run condition, starter running, cough, 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 engine start, starter off. Okay, move to the right hand engine, ignition and pumper on, starter running, engine coughs, starts, starter off, engine running. So now our left and right engines are running, and all you have to do to kill them both, move the switches off. Done. Okay. Now for our trimmers. To trim the left-hand engine, we'll be using P6. So we'll go in here and assign P6 proportional. Yes, that's good. And I'm going to reverse it just so that the plus 100 is not with the lever up, but with the lever away for me. I like it that way. And down here, trim right. Same thing, BP5. I'm going to reverse it simply because I like lever away to be plus 100. It's neater in my mind. Say OK to that, because that's all our functions done. Now, if you went into servo assignment and did auto, which we've done earlier, you see we've got two channels assigned for trim left and trim right. But there's no actual servo there. All we're going to be doing is affecting the throttle left and throttle right servos. So we can remove those as actual channels because there will be no servo dedicated to them. They're just going to be acting as little sub-throttles, trimmers for the main throttles. Okay, right, let's have a look at what's happening so far. Now then, channels 1 and 5 are our throttles, left and right. Okay. Channel 6, 7 and 8 are the left-hand engine switches. So let's have a look at what happens. At the moment, everything's off. If I move the switch to the mid position, 6, which is ignition, and 7, which is the pump, should switch on, but 8, which is the starter motor, should remain off. There we go. Now I'll move the switch to its end position. The starter comes on, engine starts, back to the mid position. There we go. And if we want to, switch everything off. And the right hand engine, which is 9, 10 and 11. So if I move the switch to the mid position, the ignition and the pump should come on. And if I move it to the end position, the starter comes on, engine starts, starter off, ignition and pump still running, switch it off. There we go. Lovely. That's that bit sorted. Now, what about getting P5 and P6 to give a little bit of throttle and a little bit of in-flight synchronization? We can come to fine-tuning. Nice and easy. Free mix from trim left to throttle left. Come down here, master value. Let's say we're going to allow it 20%. Or, yeah, 20%. And if we have a look at what that does to throttle left, okay, there's the lever all the way back. It brings it down to minus 120. Lever forward brings it up to 80. So it's allowing it 20% travel either way. Snag is, if you haven't got it exactly centered, when you go to full throttle there, of course, you've got 80 or 120. You're only going to get your normal 100% throttle when it's there. So you've got to remember to put it but but we can easily solve that. Come out of here, and we'll make the switch, the throttle stick. So we'll move the throttle stick. There we go. We don't want that. We want it to be proportional. And we don't want a minus 100 to plus 100. We want it simply to be 100% on with the throttle fully back and 0 with the throttle fully forward. So first of all, we'll remove the center. And that allows it to go just from 0 to 100. But at the moment, it's giving 100% of the mix. In other words, fully switched on with the throttle all the way forward. I don't want that. If I reverse it, now with the throttle stick fully forward, it's 0, switch off. Bring the throttle back, it's fully on. Let's say OK to that and see what effect that has. Now then, the P6 lever is at the midpoint, so it's not having any mixing effect. I'll move the throttle stick on its own, so plus 100, minus 100. Let's trim back, minus 120. I'll open the throttle up. We get to 100. Lovely. I'll now move P6 all through its range. It has no effect on the top end whatsoever. I'll put it back to the middle, and I'll bring the throttle back to the midpoint. So we're cruising around on mid-throttle, and we think, engine's running a little bit slow. I can just gently open up P6, give it a bit more oomph. And if I bring the throttle all the way back, it's going to be opened a little bit still, but it does allow you to sync. But you can always pull it back using the P6 control like that. Okay. So once again, at idle, I've got the full range on the P6 lever to adjust just the bottom end idle, or if I want, do a little bit of revving up and down for engine starting purposes or for taxiing around. Okay, notice it's not having any effect on the right hand throttle. And all we need to do then is do exactly the same from trim right to throttle right. What value did we use? Was it 20, I think? Yep. And the switch, again, it's going to be the throttle, but it's going to be proportional. No center to it. And I'm going to reverse it so that with the throttle stick fully forward, it's at 0, not 100. The throttle stick back is 100. Okay. Now let's have a look. Put the P5, which is the right-hand slider, to the middle. I'll operate the throttle. You can see it operates normally. Now I'm going to operate the P5 slider, and I've got, just as I have if I operate the P6 slider on the left. So I can operate both sliders together and give me a little bit of throttling on the ground. Or when I'm starting the right-hand engine, I can operate just the right-hand slider, give me a bit more throttle, etc. And once again, if I go to fully forward on the right-hand slider, but open up the throttle, it only reaches plus 100% because the throttle stick itself is cancelling out the mix as we go. And again, come to mid-throttle. If I think, the right-hand engine needs to speed up or slow down a little bit, I can tweak it using that right-hand slider. Just got to remember that when you come into land, it's going to be affecting it down there. You think, hang on, if I know we're at mid-throttle, it's 5%. Come back to idle, it's 10% difference. And that's because, of course, the throttle stick is proportionally removing it at high power and adding it all back in at full. So, of course, halfway up, you're only getting half the effect. So there you go. That's how you can get all that to work. Have fun with that one.